Well, hey there, and welcome to Legally Blissed Conversations, and a warm welcome today to my friend, Megan Smiley. My name is Susie Hickson, and I'm a trademark attorney and the founder of the Legally Blissed community. After having practiced law for about 20 years in both big law and having had my own boutique firm, I've worked with a lot of lawyers, and I have many women lawyer friends. And I've learned that while women lawyers are incredible advocates for others, they seem to not always be great self-advocates. Hence, Legally Blissed was developed to give women lawyers a platform to network and collaborate and support each other, all while learning to integrate the Bliss method to become a more fierce and powerful advocate, not just for others, but for themselves and for each other. So Bliss is an acronym for boundary setting, leveraging AI and legal tech, integrating creativity, self-confidence, and support and community, which is exactly what Legally Blissed does. Today, again, I'm thrilled to welcome Megan to discuss her unique journey as a woman lawyer. Megan is a former law firm associate and was the director of international and non-JD programs at Fordham Law School. She has her own podcast called The Lawyer's Escape Pod. She's also a coach. She helps lawyers and other professionals let go of their traditional careers and design creative and coaching businesses that bring them real freedom and fulfillment. I'm so happy to get to hang out with you today, Megan, and learn more about your journey. We already know a little bit about each other. We've participated in some podcasts together. You were on a recent show. We talked about creativity. You're such a creative person. I really admire you, and I'm so happy to have you on the show today.
I'm so happy to be here. It's always fun to chat with you, Susie.
Likewise. So I want to go back to the very beginning.
Okay.
A lot of time, but let's go back to
many years ago.
I know, and those years are like drifting further and further back. Like anytime I'm having to select like the year that I'm born on, like if I'm filling out a form, it's like it's like the scroll is not going to get any better, right?
Yeah, it's real.
So I want to know why you decided to go to law school.
It is not a particularly inspired reason. It was really like that I didn't see any other obvious thing to do. So okay. I come from a family of lawyers. Both of my grandparents on my dad's side were lawyers. My dad and two of his three sisters were lawyers. Like just a lot of lawyers. So it was always sort of an obvious option in my head. And I had done some like legal internship things as jobs during college. But I came out of college and I didn't go straight to law school. I thought I'm going to go explore. I had a bunch of different jobs. And basically I was kind of seeing whether something else popped up that inspired me. And 3 years in, nothing really had. And I just thought, well, I guess I'll go to law school.
I need to keep learning here. Okay. So that's cool though, that you sort of knew what you were getting into, right? I talked to a lot of lawyers who are like, I was the first one in my family that went to law school. I really had no idea what was going to happen. Did they warn you?
Yeah. You know, when I said I was going to law school, my dad said, can't you think of something more interesting to do?
And your dad's a lawyer.
Oh, yeah. A lawyer turned law professor, like very much in it. And, but maybe he saw something in me that I hadn't quite realized at that point, which was like, yeah, you can do it. Is that really what you want to do?
Right. Because he was probably being a good father and didn't want you to go to law school because you just felt like you had to, or it was like the natural path of the family. Right. Like, I'm sure he wanted you to go from your own like will and volition to like want to be.
Exactly.
Want to be a lawyer.
Yeah. Like despite coming from a family of lawyers, there was no pressure on me to be a lawyer. The problem was I just didn't have a better idea.
You know, that is okay. Like everyone has to have a beautiful, like, you know, I talk with women who have very aspirational things, like they want to change the world. You know, I was kind of like you. I was like the end of college and I was like, how can I extend this college thing for 3 more years? Like, you know, I went straight to law school and I was like, this is not like, it wasn't for me. I was like, this is not like college. This is not even close to college. I think it was smart though, that you did go out and get some experience, some real world experience. Do you think that helped you?
Yeah, I think it helped me. I think I would have been pretty burned out to go straight from college to law school. And it's funny looking back and knowing the people who went straight, they seemed like so much younger to me then. Now I'm like, whatever, we're all the same age. But
Right.
I think it was good to just have some work experience.
Sure.
And I had a bunch of different jobs in those 3 years. So it was good. And I think I was like, I enjoyed law school. I didn't get there and go, oh, I've made a big mistake. I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, it's interesting. It's hard, but it wasn't, it wasn't like I picked it out of a hat and it made no sense to me. There are parts of being a lawyer that really resonated with me, and I liked the process. And, I also had this interest. I was a French and international studies major. So also, what else are you going to do if you're a French and international studies major?
Right? It's like that kind of, so that's like a liberal arts background, right? So it's graduate school, law school,
right? And so,
cool. I don't know.
Yeah. So if I had an idea, it was that I thought I would do something kind of with an international focus. And I actually studied abroad in London during law school. So
wait, okay.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that. So that's a little bit of an unusual thing to do in law school. I studied abroad in law school also, and was strongly discouraged from doing so. And it was one of the best experiences of my law school, career. So you liked law school and you studied in London. So tell me a little bit about how you made all that happen.
Yeah. So I went to Boston College for law school, and they had a program that they ran in London. And when I knew I wanted to study abroad when I applied to law school. It was one of the reasons I picked the school I went to.
Smart. Yeah.
And it was the only thing I was particularly focused on. Like, people had all these, they're like, I want to get on law review. I was like, I just want to go to London for a semester.
Yeah, like, screw law review. I want to go to London. I mean,
looking back, I didn't really recognize it, but I was a pretty non-traditional. I was very traditional in some ways, like resume wise, but like in terms of like my mentality about it, I was kind of non-traditional because I didn't think I wanted to go work at a big firm anyway. So I was like, you guys can all fight over these jobs over here. Like, I'm going to go in and just kind of see what happens. And I loved it. It's like, I did a lot of EU law, but it was just sort of also getting a perspective on different legal systems, this idea that like, this is how everything is done, just because that's the one system that we learn. It was interesting to get a different point of view.
Yeah.
I just liked living in London too. So.
Were you there a summer during law school, or during like an actual I
did a whole semester.
You did a whole semester.
Yeah. It was the second semester of my 2L year.
Okay. Were there many other students from your law school that did that program?
There were 10 students each year that went. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So, some, not a ton, but some. Yeah.
So what would you tell a law student who is interested in kind of taking an unconventional path in law school?
I would say, and it's funny because in my job at Fordham, I worked with student JDs going abroad. Like, that became a career of mine. I would say, if you feel inclined, do it, but also recognize that that's a sign that you might be a non-traditional student of some sort. And
it's okay.
And that's okay, right? To say like, there are a lot of different routes out of law school. And if that's sort of what's calling to you, it's, it's just do it. And it's information about sort of where your career may go from there. Mm-hmm. I actually was, again, in my next job at a conference about studying abroad in law school. And one woman who was at AU had done a pretty elaborate study about their students who had studied abroad, and found that it didn't affect most people's first job out of law school, but it highly affected their second job out of law school. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So be open-minded. And I like that tip to kind of recognize that in yourself. If you're feeling like, maybe I want to do a summer abroad, instead of going and clerking somewhere, because that's what I actually did, was I did a summer abroad. And recognize it in yourself, and don't necessarily fight it, right? Don't be like, oh, I know I can go over, because this is what everybody else is doing. They're going to work at the big firms and
law school gets very like, it's just a conveyor belt of things that you're supposed to do. And it can get very, just like the energy just kind of pushes you in one direction. So it takes extra thought to do something slightly out of the normal, but just, I'm all about like authenticity and doing your own thing, and acknowledging that law school is sort of a particularly hard place to do that, but just
it really is. Okay. So you went to law school. Did you kind of do like a traditional 3-year program?
Yep.
Just okay.
Other than the semester abroad, yes.
Other than the semester abroad,
yeah.
So after you graduated, what did you do? Were you ready to take on the world, or were you kind of freaking out, or somewhere in between?
So I got, as much as I sort of did my own thing, I also got wrapped up in, OCI, and just like, okay, well, I sort of just fell into it. Like, I applied and I got a job at a firm, and I was like, okay, well, they're going to pay me a lot of money. And I didn't really have a better alternative at that point. So I would just say I found myself at a law firm, a sort of traditional corporate law firm.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Because I feel like you kind of found yourself in law school, and then you kind of found yourself at a traditional corporate law firm. However, you were very proactive in doing that abroad program. And I know that at some point you do get a little more proactive and being really mindful of that. So I'll get to that in a minute. But what was your first few years like for you? Were you?
I mean, it was okay. It was sort of the same thing as law school. It's like, I was pretty good at it. Like, exactly. Except for I'm paying money rather than getting money. I wasn't totally miserable. There was something kind of exciting about it on some level. And, I worked at a place where I more or less liked people. It wasn't like some sort of hideous experience.
Yeah.
But it was also just very clear to me that this was not what I wanted to spend my life doing. You look around and you're like, these partners' lives are not what I aspire to.
You're like eliminating what you know what you don't want, right? You're like, I don't want that. What area of the law were you practicing at that time?
I did corporate transactional. So I did a lot of securities work and some M&A, largely securities. Which, like, I didn't go to law school to get into securities work, right? Like, what?
It's so crazy because that's why I'm like, because I know a little bit where some more of the story goes with you. It just, You remind me a little bit of, I'm going to give a shout out to someone in the Legally Blissed community. And if I've not introduced you to her yet, and you don't know her already, it's Christine Vartanian. I don't know if you all been
we were on the thing about creativity.
That's right. That's right. Because, and I'm just sitting here thinking about her because she has such like an analytical brain, right? And she started out in engineering, and then now she does styling, right? So we were talking about the right side of our brain kind of balancing with the left, and you're really great at that too, obviously, because you came out, you're doing securities, which I would think is extremely, extremely analytical. How long did you do that?
4 years. So not
that's
a very long time, but like enough to decide, not for me.
But you know what? I think 4 years is honestly a really valiant effort, and it's a solid period of time to figure out whether or not that was going to work for you, rather than going in and trying it for 3 months, right?
Yeah. And when I went in, I sort of, out of law school, I sort of assumed I'd do litigation because that's kind of what but you had the opportunity to take projects from different departments, and so that's why I actually chose it, because what I did realize was I really hated research and writing. So I was like, I would so I actually had a lot of confidence that I had picked the best practice group for myself. Like, I didn't feel like, if only I would have done litigation. Which I think then gave me the confidence in my next steps being like, I didn't feel like there were a bunch of rocks unturned within big law world that I needed to like explore. I was just like, I just don't like it.
You just don't like. So what was your next move?
So I started doing what I think a lot of people do at that point, which is like, what are like legally adjacent jobs? Or, and I mean, I first thought about going in-house, but I did manage to be sort of a little more intentional and recognize that, yes, that might be an obvious step, but it actually doesn't solve the problem because I just didn't enjoy the work of doing the law, right? It wasn't just that like the hours were crazy. I mean, they were, but I knew it was something more than that. I just didn't care that much about it. I just was not invested in the work.
Right.
And I had a friend who had been at another law firm and had gone into doing career services at a law school. And so I had been picking his brain. I was like, I don't want to do career services, but I studied abroad in law school. And, I had this sense that there was like international programs to be run at law schools. Admittedly, it wasn't like super well researched, but I did know someone that did it. And so I just decided, I was like, that combines the law and my interest in international things. And so
your love of travel.
Yeah, exactly. So and at that point, honestly, that was about as like wildly different a thing as I could conceive of. I wasn't like, oh, let me go, because the things I've gotten into now, just still at that point, just were not outside my realm of conception, I guess I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And so I went back to school because that's what we do as lawyers, right? It was entirely unnecessary, let me just say, but I got a master's in higher ed administration, which was sort of like just a way to get out of my firm job. It was just like a date set in the sand, and people, I don't know, it just made sense to me. So, but I always warn people it's not necessary because like we don't all need to be paying more for schooling.
Right. Like no more. Yeah, we can start earning, right? Like
exactly.
Especially more now than ever. But for what you ultimately ended up doing, you went to Fordham.
Yeah.
Did they require that type of? Okay, they didn't have that.
No, I think it helped a little in that I think it indicated that I wasn't just having a bad day in big law and threw out a resume. It indicated that I was like very serious about this transition. So I think there was that. It also, like, while I was in my program, I was networking and meeting people, and I went to a conference of international law, administrators doing international programs at law schools because of someone I knew, where I met my future boss. I didn't really like recognize it at the time, but then like 9 months later, a job opened at Fordham, and I had at least been in the same room as her, so I think it did help me ended up in the right place. I just I always like to be very clear that like you do not for this job need to have another degree.
Right. Yeah. Like how many more initials do we need after our name?
Right. Yeah. And so, and it was like my dream job. It was exactly what I was looking for. It was, I worked with JDs studying abroad. So I managed our relationship with foreign universities, and I did executive programs for foreign lawyers coming to New York.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we'd have like groups of Brazilian judges or, Spanish law students or, dignitaries coming to speak. So there was a lot of really cool stuff about that job.
Yeah. So how long were you in that position?
That one I was in for 9 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's pretty solid.
Yeah. And it was great for, I would say, like 4 to 5 years. I was like, I've cracked the code. This is great. It's like super 9 to 5. I'm not stressed out. I have a life, and I'm meeting people from all over the world. So for a while it was great.
Until it wasn't.
Yeah. And it wasn't the job's problem. It just turned out, working at a university, it's like working in the government, right? It's just like a massive bureaucracy. Sure. And it's very slow moving, and it's not very innovative. And there also just aren't that many positions, right? Like there was really nowhere for me to grow into. Maybe my boss's job, but I actually didn't really want her job. I was like, I have the job I want. There's like no better job, which is great, but also, what am I just going to do this for the rest of my life?
That's kind of a scary thought, right?
Yes. And
when
I
you
was
start getting that, you're like, ah.
Right. And I think I was also like, I was coming into my late 30s at that point, and I was, I know you and I have talked about this. My husband and I had decided that we were child free. And in my mind, I was like, this is a great job if you have kids. It's just very flexible and whatever.
Yeah.
But I think all of those factors came together for me at that moment to go, I just don't think this is enough. Like, if this is like how I'm spending my days, it just wasn't. I realized I was more ambitious and I did want sort of constant growth. It just, I had caught my breath there and it was good and there was nothing wrong with it. I just realized like, this is not my end point.
Like you might have kind of exhausted the challenging aspects of that career.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You were seeking some more like stimulation.
Yeah, exactly.
So what did you do? What happened next?
Oh my gosh. I like all of the things. Like I started applying to the Foreign Service because I was like, well, that makes sense. And I also I just started applying to other jobs, like, and this was me falling back into the, like, I don't know what makes sense. I ended up applying for I did a lot of events in my job. So I applied to this events position at a law firm in New York. And then I was like, I don't want to work at a law firm. What am I like? What?
Yeah.
That was like, okay, Megan, like take a big step back.
Okay. I think that would be a really hard job, and it probably doesn't pay as much as the lawyers, I'm sure. And it's like, if you're going to be in a law firm and you've gone to law school.
Right. And I don't know if you like anyone who's worked at a law firm is like, there's this like hierarchy and this very much like, well, I'm, here on the hierarchy. And, even if you've basically done all the same stuff, it was clearly not going to be the right fit. It was just me not knowing, okay, I had already made a big career change, right? I'd already gone through this process once. And I was just like, I feel like I'm at the bottom of the barrel of ideas that make sense. And that's when I was like, I guess I got to go find another barrel.
Okay. So what kind of barrel did you go looking at?
I just started to ask myself, what am I curious about? What sounds fun? And not even from exactly like applying for a job point of view, but just in life. So I took a photography class. I took a graphic design class. I took a voiceover class. I started a travel blog. I started my podcast. I was just like, and in that, what I sort of was like, I'm drawn to something creative, and I'm drawn to not just like creative, but like I want to build something.
Right.
Like those were the things I started to realize by just following my natural inclinations in exploring. And I was also realizing, I was like, oh my God, my job was pretty flexible. I was like, the idea of, but even so, I was like, I don't really like having to be somewhere when other people tell me and work on other people's priorities that I think are dumb.
And then that kind of stuff, like when you start creating your own thing, you start wearing that entrepreneurial hat where you're like, I want to build something out of nothing. It's really hard to put someone else's priorities, air quotes, ahead of what you're wanting to build.
Right. There was this like one thing that every time I had to do it at my job just drove me nuts, is that every time we like hosted something, my boss would be like, let's put out a press release. I'm like, okay, this press release is just this thing that it's not even a press release. It just goes on the website. And I was like, nobody's reading this. And we just put the same thing up for the same program year after year. And I had so much resistance to doing it, right? So much so that I went to like the communications. I was like, can you like tell me how many people click on this? Because I need to go back and tell my boss that this is a big waste of everybody's time. Stuff like that, just I realized was driving me nuts, is that like I'm also a very like efficiency driven person. So doing stuff just to be doing stuff not for me.
Was
But that's all just to say that I was having this realization that I was like, I think maybe the thing I have to do is work for myself, which had not been on my radar.
That's interesting. Yeah. Because, okay, question. You come from a family of a lot of lawyers. Are there any entrepreneurs in your family?
My brother is entrepreneurial, and now he definitely is. He and his wife have opened restaurants in Nashville.
Cool.
He was still sort of just typical businessy before that, but like as a kid, he was always like, creating little businesses for himself. So I was always my brother is the entrepreneurial type. And a couple of my cousins, but honestly, no, like my family is pretty like, I mean, I think my dad is genuinely shocked to have ended up with 2 kids running their own businesses.
For sure. But that's kind of an example of how like we have to be careful about how we tag kids.
Yes.
Like I'm guilty of doing that. Like this kid's entrepreneurial. This kid is, I don't know, plays YouTube all day.
Right.
Whatever it is, right? But like you never know what they're gonna end up doing. So
right. And also how it looks different. Like I always think of myself as an accidental entrepreneur. And the reason why I got there was because I sort of identified my values being like freedom and growth. And I was like, I'm not sure any job fits that. So I'm going to have to figure out how to be an entrepreneur. Whereas like my brother's version of it just was the way you would more expect to see it. So I always tell people too, is like, don't rule it out by telling yourself you're not entrepreneurial. Like I don't look like your typical entrepreneur either.
Right. And by saying like, I'm not entrepreneurial, air quotes.
Yeah.
That's just a thought, right? Like who knows? Right. Like that's just something that you're telling. That's just a story that you're telling yourself.
Right. Exactly.
So you sat down and you really thought about what your values were. And you're like, okay, I want to create a lifestyle, almost like a lifestyle career that aligns with what my values are.
Yeah. Yep. And sort of very unexpected. In the midst of this, one of the other things I was doing was renovating our apartment. And I just loved that. I was like, I'd love the idea of like being out and about and doing something creative and, having my own business doing it. And so at some point of all this throwing spaghetti at the wall, I decided, I was like, interior design is the thing I'm going to go after. I'm going to do it. Yes. Which was surprising. Like nobody was like, oh yeah, we always thought Megan would be an interior designer.
I mean, but look at your wallpaper. I
know. Like I do love it. And it's definitely like part of me. It was part of me that was sort of like coming into fruition sort of in real time then, I would say.
Yeah.
Again, it's like that. It would have made zero sense for me a decade earlier it would just not have even been on my radar at all. So I started, I still was working, but I had decided, I was like, okay, I like took a class. I started like getting clients on the side and building my interior design business.
So I love that because this is just an example of how it doesn't matter how long you've been out of school, even if you've been a practicing lawyer or whatever, you can always be learning. You can always be integrating creativity, right? Like you were doing all of these different things and really like, maybe I think you said you took a photography class?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So maybe you're not like a professional photographer now, but that work that you did still like contributed to kind of stimulating the creative side of yourself.
Yeah. And I think you sometimes don't know what the thing is that's going to stick. Right. So in this, meanwhile, I had started my podcast and I was still doing it. I just didn't think of it as I was just like a hobby, but it was something that I really enjoyed doing. And so I kept doing it. And so like, sometimes you just have to do a bunch of things to see which sticks
and eliminate what's not working for you and kind of double down on what is. Okay. So you started gathering clients, took a class, you're doing it sounds like you're growing a portfolio.
Yeah. I mean, I had a website, I had professional photos.
Yeah.
I had a card. I was doing it.
You were doing the thing. So,
Yep.
okay, so let's talk about Megan, the interior designer.
Yeah. I mean, that was very scary because it's like I had no background in it, but it also taught me a lot about how much you can learn just getting yourself out in the world, talking to people, listening to podcasts. And so I was it. Like, I was all in. I was like, let me build this until I can quit this job. So like there was no part of me that was waffling, but then the pandemic hit.
So you're not going and visiting anyone's homes, right?
No. And so not only, and I did some virtual things, like I had some clients that I could do virtually, but it was more just that like life got turned upside down for everybody, no doubt.
Yeah.
My husband and I left New York, what we thought was temporarily. And we were in Montana, which turned out to be 7 months, right? And then we were discussing moving. And in this time period, I was just also being in this entrepreneurial space is in some ways so fun because like you learn so much about yourself and you start to really like do more personal development kind of things. At least I did.
Yeah.
And you know, I was posed with this question of like, do we move back to New York / the East Coast? I'm just a very East Coast person. Mm-hmm. That's where my network was, right? Like my clients were my college roommates and my high school friends in DC. Like it just, my whole network was there. So when we were thinking about moving to California, I was like, okay, it's going to be a heavy lift to like restart a business in a place I don't have a network.
Yeah.
And I had also realized in this time frame that I really loved not having to be anywhere geographically specific, right? We were in Montana. I was like, wow, working remotely is amazing. Like,
yeah,
I kind of like to keep being able to do that. And that wasn't very aligned with the kind of work in the interior design space that I wanted to do. And finally, I was also realizing where my natural strengths lay, which, you know, I can do attention to detail. That's what we do as lawyers, but and that's a lot of what you have to do in interior design. It's like, okay, what are the exact measurements? Let me do procurement. And I just didn't love that work. And I did a strengths assessment on myself, and it turns out like, yeah, that is the stuff that exhausts me. So it was just learning about what my strengths and my values were, even more so, just refocused me because of the circumstances of the pandemic and everything changing. And meanwhile, I had been doing, where she went. I'm just going to keep talking. Meanwhile, I had been running my podcast, The Lawyer's Escape Pod, talking to people who left law to go do a lot of different things. And people started reaching out to me, and all of a sudden I kind of realized, I was like, you know, I really love this too. I've been doing it just for fun, talking with people, sort of giving advice here and there. And so at that point, I just realized, I was like, you know, my sort of true north is this sort of entrepreneurial vein, doing something I find interesting, creative, working for myself, having a lot of freedom. And so that was the point at which I said, okay, I'm gonna leave the design stuff for just more fun for me when I like design my own place, and focus on helping lawyers transition out of law into something that they feel more passionate about. So yeah, I'm gonna give Susie a second to see if she gets back in here, but I think her internet was dying. Well, I'll give her a couple more minutes, but as a podcast host myself, I feel like I got to keep the show going. I'll just like keep talking a little bit about my journey. So at that point, that's when I started saying, all right, I think I'm going to look into supporting lawyers and making transitions. So um, it started out by me helping people do just transition to whatever, like maybe you just wanted another job or another, baby step. And that was good. But what I found I was like really lit up by doing was helping people who kind of wanted to make bigger transitions or really were like, had something inside them, sort of versions of me a little earlier on of like, I am creative and I do want to build something. And I have really like high standards for the lifestyle that I want to live, not just like money, but like, freedom and flexibility and people just really like allowing themselves to dream a little bit bigger. And so that's sort of where I have focused is really helping people dig into their dreams, decide what they really want, do the work of clearing the way, which is largely like us getting out of our own way because again, like, maybe you didn't think you would be an entrepreneur, or maybe you don't think it's sensible to do something sort of off the beaten track. So there are a lot of ways in which we get in our own way. And just, clearing that out and learning how to just take step by step towards those dreams. So that's what I help people do now. And it's like, I love it. It's my favorite thing. And also I always say like, I can't look at my career and say, I know I'm going to do anything forever. And I let go of that expectation because I think that puts so much pressure on us to be like, I've got to figure out the thing and then I'm going to do the thing forever. What if it's all just a process and an evolution? Like you don't, you sort of set your goals, your like high level vision, and you just keep moving forward and it might change. You might learn new things, you might shift. And that doesn't mean you've done anything wrong. It just means you're evolving. So that's kind of like my theory of the universe, really. But I think we're just not going to get Susie back, sadly. So I will wrap up. If anyone wants to ask me any questions about any of the iterations of my career, I'm more than happy to chat. You can find me at megansmiley.com or Megan Smiley ESQ at LinkedIn and Instagram. And I'm sad that we lost Susie, but thank you so much, Susie, for having me on. And it was always great to be here. Bye, guys.